Gerald and Charlene Gallego were a notorious American serial killer couple active in the late 70s. They abducted, tortured, and murdered young women, leaving a chilling legacy of heinous crimes that led to the brutal deaths of 9 women, 1 man, and 1 unborn child. Welcome to Murder, Mystery, and Crime, where we explore true crime cases with care and respect. These stories are shared for educational and awareness purposes only, never to sensationalize or disrespect the victims and their families. Mary Beth Sowers fit all the adjectives of admiration or envy: beautiful, bright, outgoing, ambitious, warm, sensitive, in love with the world around her and the man she planned to marry. She was said to be somebody who had a lot of bubble and a lot of sparkle in the way she talked. Mary Beth graduated from Sequoia High School in Redwood City in 1978. Her father was a nuclear physicist at ITEL Corporation in Palo Alto. Following graduation, she moved to Redding, California to attend junior college. There she won the title of runner-up in the Miss Shasta County contest. Mary Beth began her junior year at CSUS, California State University, Sacramento, majoring in finance. Despite a full course load, she worked during the week at Arco Financial Services and on weekends at JCPenney to support herself. Later, she worked as a ski instructor on weekends at Boreal Ridge, a ski area east of Sacramento. Her talents also included being an expert seamstress, one weekend tailoring 3 suits. Mary Beth began dating Craig Miller in late fall of 1979. Theirs was described by friends as a relationship of equals. One of their friends even said it's so hard to find 2 people in the same relationship who are that much alike. So dynamic, outgoing, and personable, Craig Miller graduated from high school in 1976. 2 years later, he graduated from American River College before attending CSUS, California State University, Sacramento, where he was on the dean's list. Like Mary Beth, he seemed tireless with the sky is the limit. Aside from being an accounting executive at Miller Advertising, Craig was vice president of the campus chapter of Sigma Phi Epsilon and the 1979 Man of the Year. When Mary Beth turned 21 on October 21, 1980, she and Craig Miller had been dating for nearly a year. With a spring graduation coming up, marriage plans did not seem premature. New Year's Eve 1981 seemed the perfect wedding day for the couple because New Year's Eve was Mary Beth's favorite day. On the night of the Sigma Phi Epsilon fraternity function, Craig and Mary Beth arrived late, but they were happy on that night and they left very early. They left the Carousel restaurant just after midnight. Shortly thereafter, a friend happened by chance to notice them in the back of an Oldsmobile Cutlass rather than Mary Beth's red Honda. After an exchange of words between the friend and the front seat occupants of the car, a woman was in the driver's seat with a man beside her. The Oldsmobile sped off with Craig and Mary Beth still in the back seat. That was the last time they were ever seen alive. As with many non-domestic crimes of violence, solving such crimes often takes a combination of painstaking police investigative work and a bit of luck. In this instance, the luck came with a license plate number taken down by a concerned friend who thought it unusual that Craig and his fiancée, Mary Beth, would take off with strangers in the wee hours of the morning of November 2, 1980 from the Arden Fair Shopping Center parking lot, leaving her Honda behind. When the couple failed to return to the Honda by that afternoon, the friend and fellow member of Miller's fraternity reported them missing. Tracing the license number of the car Craig and Mary Beth disappeared in, the police discovered that the car, a silver 1977 Oldsmobile Cutlass, was registered to Charlene Williams or Charles Williams, her father. This was the second big break. In the meantime, Craig's mother worried that her usually dependable son and future daughter-in-law were missing. When Craig failed to show up for his 10 a.m. shift at a paint store in Carmichael, his mother telephoned police. After learning from the Department of Motor Vehicles that the Oldsmobile Cutlass belonged to Charlene A. Williams or Charles Williams, detectives drove to the home of Charles and Mercedes Williams on Berendo Drive in Arden Park. The parents told the detectives that the Cutlass was their daughter Charlene's, and that she had left home about 6:30 p.m. on Saturday to go to a movie theater with her boyfriend, Stephen Robert File. During the conversation, Charlene drove up in her silver Cutlass. This was the third big break, although it did not seem like it at the time. Charlene, 24, was blonde, pretty, petite, and 7 months pregnant. She coolly denied any knowledge of the disappearance of Soers or Miller. She allowed the detectives to search the cutlass. They found no indication of foul play or otherwise incriminating evidence that a crime had been committed. Charlene complained of being sick because of her pregnancy and suffering from a hangover. She gave few details about her boyfriend, Stephen File. The detectives, unaware that Craig's body was soon to be discovered and having no other reason to detain the ill Charlene, further promised to return later that day to photograph her. It was not until the following day that Charles and Mercedes Williams admitted to the detectives that their daughter was married to Stephen File and that this was actually a fake name used by Gerald Gallego, 34, who was wanted on incest and other sex charges. Suddenly, some frightening pieces of a bizarre puzzle began to fall into place. Not only had the Gallegos become the chief suspects in the murder of Craig Miller and disappearance of Mary Beth Soers, but neighboring Yolo County authorities were also investigating the connection of a Stephen File to the kidnapping murder of Virginia Mochel, a local bartender. Physically speaking, Gerald and Charlene Gallego were definitely mismatched. He was a shade over 5'7" with rugged features, a stump of a neck, and deep dark eyes. His brown hair was parted to one side, slicked down on the other. Charlene looked like a Barbie doll. Cute, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, sweet and innocent. She probably could have had any man she wanted, and took advantage of that at least twice in marriages prior to Gerald. Indeed, this was the one practice the two had in common, as Gerald had gone down the aisle a minimum of 5 times prior to ever laying eyes on Charlene. Their earlier backgrounds present two vastly different lives before they defied the odds and became a couple. Gerald Armand Gallego was born on July 17, 1946 in Sacramento, the offspring of Gerald Albert and Lorraine Gallego. He came from a long line of violent career criminals and sex offenders on both sides of the family. Probably no one was more violent than his father Gerald Albert, whom he never had the pleasure of meeting. The elder Gerald, a convicted multiple murderer, was executed in Mississippi's gas chamber in March 1955. His mother, who earned money as a prostitute in the 1950s, remarried twice following Gallego's death. Court records indicate that Gerald rarely got along with his stepfathers. Gerald No. 2 was 9 at the time of his father's death and well on his way to following in his father's bloody footsteps. Gerald Armand Gallego's criminal record began at age 6 and included everything from running away, to various sex offenses, to burglary. At age 12, he was placed on probation by the juvenile authorities for burglary and later charged with committing lewd, lewd, and lascivious acts with a 6-year-old girl. This landed him in a California Youth Authority (CYA) facility, the Fred C. and L School for Boys, in October 1959. Paroled in July 1961, he was arrested again less than a year later, along with his half-brother, David Hunt, for armed robbery and sentenced to the Preston School of Industry in Ione, California. Gerald escaped shortly thereafter, turned himself in, and was eventually paroled in 1963. School proved to be equally frustrating for Gerald Gallego. He was suspended from Sacramento High School in December 1963 after receiving 5 Fs in classes and behavior. According to his probation officer at the time, he was considered a habitual truant whose suspension was for truancy, tardiness, profanity, and violating closed campus rules. Gerald Gallego's troubles with the law continued into adulthood. Often bragging to friends about getting away with crimes ranging from stealing cars to holding up drugstores, Gerald and his half-brother David were finally arrested on October 25, 1969, during an armed robbery of a motel in Vacaville, California. The half-brothers and another inmate escaped from the Solano County Jail shortly thereafter and were recaptured 4 days later in San Francisco. Gallego was sentenced to serve 5 years to life in state prison. He started his term at the Dual Vocational Institution at Tracy before being transferred to the California Medical Facility in Vacaville for psychiatric treatment for depression. By the time Gerald Gallego met Charlene Williams, he had been arrested no less than 23 times. By comparison to Gerald's early years, Charlene led a charmed life. Charlene Adele Williams was born on October 19, 1956 in Stockton, California, a quiet, rural town about 50 miles from Sacramento. The only child of Charles and Mercedes Williams, she was the apple of their eyes. Whatever their little girl with the golden pigtails wanted was usually there for the asking. This was made possible by the incredible success of Charles Williams, going from a supermarket butcher to a top executive for another supermarket chain with outlets across the country. Mercedes supplemented his income by selling cosmetics. The family ultimately moved from Stockton to the upper-middle-class Arden Park area of Sacramento. By most accounts, Charlene grew up shy and aloof, calling little attention to herself. Unlike her future husband, Charlene had never been arrested or accused of any crime, much less served any time prior to that fateful day of November 17, 1980. Indeed, her early years showed much promise. An unusually high IQ led her to being placed in a 6th grade class for gifted students. 2 years earlier she had learned to play the violin with such passion that her father bought her one. There was also talk of her someday attending the Juilliard School of Music. She seemed to be a natural leader among students and eagerly participated in various extracurricular activities. It was not until Charlene started attending Rio Americano High School that changes began to occur in her personality, habits, and potential. A predilection for sex, drugs, alcohol, and rebellion seemed to all but ruin the edge she had once enjoyed over other students. Her grades began to tumble to the point where graduation, once a foregone conclusion, became a struggle in which she barely succeeded. The one positive thing Charlene still had going for her was a daddy who would do anything to please his little girl. After she graduated, he bought Charlene a brand new Oldsmobile, which would later come back to haunt her, put her up in her own apartment, and helped her improve her wardrobe. He even went so far as to invest $15,000 in the Dingling shop, Charlene's on a whim business venture in which she rented a 10 by 12-foot space in a Folsom shopping strip. There she sold potted plants, macrame, and knickknacks. Unfortunately for Charlene's eager to please her father, her attention and desires quickly moved elsewhere. Gallego's 5 wives who preceded Charlene, each and every one became a battered wife, often abused emotionally and financially as well. Gerald's first marriage took place in 1963. He was 16 and she was 21. In April of 1964, his first child, Krista, was born. The marriage was short-lived after the wife was subjected to beatings with Gerald's fists and a hammer. Both parents fought tooth and nail for custody of their daughter. Ultimately, Gerald gained custody and sent Krista to live with his mother. Marriage number 2 occurred on July 12, 1966, to a 24-year-old West Sacramento waitress. Only 26 days of marriage passed before the bride saw Gerald's true colors and left him. He chased me all over the house that day with a knife, she recalled. I locked myself in the bathroom and he finally calmed down. I was going to leave then and he wouldn't let me out of the house. Gallego's third wife, a laundry worker, found it almost too painful to talk about their violent marriage. I've blocked all that out for years, she stammered. It's such a horrible memory. They had wed on October 14, 1967. He kept beating me. I couldn't take it. He became very cruel. The marriage lasted only 1 month. Marriage number 4 for Gerald took place in Reno in March 1969. Harriet, 19, was pregnant when the marriage ended less than a month later. Her father, speaking on behalf of his daughter, said, "He was such a nice boy when he was coming to the house." Then they got married. 19 days later, I wanted to kill him. As far as it is known, Harriet's daughter still does not know who her real father is. Gallego went down the aisle a 5th time in Butte County on October 5, 1974. His 19-year-old wife was a laundress. The minister who performed the ceremony remembered that a young girl named Krista had served as ring bearer. She had been introduced as Gerald's sister. In fact, she was his 10-year-old daughter from his first marriage. Gerald separated from wife number 5 in August of 1977. When he made Charlene his 6th wife, his divorce from the 5th was still 2 months away from being finalized. Charlene Williams did not fare much better when it came to marriage. She celebrated her 18th birthday on October 19, 1974 by marrying a 19-year-old soldier named Rick. 1 day later, Rick reported for army duty in Germany. The marriage was annulled shortly thereafter at the petition of Rick's parents. According to Rick, he and Charlene met while he was on a weekend home leave in Sacramento. He had become quickly attracted to Charlene, he said, because she was very quiet, soft-spoken, very graceful, and her manners were perfect. Then he noticed a big change in her just before their marriage. She had a hairdresser cut and style her hair, she began using makeup, and she started dressing with flair. Upon arriving in Germany, Rick claimed to have written Charlene almost daily, but received no response. The annulment was granted on May 5, 1975. In the meantime, Charlene had decided to give college a try by enrolling at California State University in the fall of 1974. Her major was psychology. This lark lasted one semester before she dropped out. Marriage number 2 for Charlene took place on August 29, 1976 in a ceremony attended by over 100 guests at a United Methodist Church in Sacramento. The groom, Elliot, was a 24-year-old ex-soldier whom Charlene had met while a high school senior and had dated off and on. During their brief but stormy marriage, both Charlene and Elliot encountered health problems. Charlene suffered from bronchial asthma, said Elliot, which he believed she used as a crutch to lean on if something didn't go right. He described himself as an epileptic, subject to violent seizures. According to Elliot, Charlene once tried to commit suicide during their marriage by ingesting Pine Sol disinfectant. She opened the doggone thing up and stuck it in her mouth, he said. That's when I knocked it right out of her mouth, otherwise she would have drank it. He also admitted to drug use, sometimes heavy, and accused Charlene of the same, along with alcohol abuse. The marriage officially ended on May 25, 1977. In the fall of 1977, Charlene Williams met Gerald Gallego. Neither could have imagined what a lethal combination they were about to make. The two of them actually met the same year. Just 1 month before Charlene turned 21 years old. So she was 20 and Gerald was about 30 at the time. The two of them met at a poker club in Sacramento. And Charlene remembered being immediately attracted to Gerald. He was a very well put together man. And the two of them got talking and Charlene realized that this man was just very charming, very charismatic, nice, and a clean-cut fellow. He seemed to really care about what she was saying. He really wanted to listen, he took an interest in her and he made her feel really special. And so, when he asked her number, she gave him theirs. The next day, Charlene woke up to a delivery of a dozen long-stemmed roses at her door with a text next to them that said to a very sweet girl from Gerald. Charlene was just absolutely taken with this man. The two of them met up for a few more days over the next 2 weeks and they began this lovely romance. Within 2 weeks of meeting each other, Charlene moved into Gerald's apartment and the two of them were super happy. This relationship seemed to be going really well. There were no reports of any negative aspects of the whole relationship at this point in time. There was no abuse, there was nothing toxic that we have, everything was just amazing until one night when Gerald asked Charlene if they could discuss their sexual fantasies and, of course, Charlene was up for it. She was willing to have this kind of conversation with her boyfriend. Charlene went first. She told Gerald all about her different fetishes, her different kinks, and I think they were all relatively normal, but then Gerald starts telling Charlene about his and he gets to this one particular fantasy where he describes wanting to take women as sex slaves, but he didn't want just any sex slave. Gerald said that these sex slaves had to be young, ripe for the picking. Charlene basically thought that this was Gerald's way of saying that he liked younger women, probably younger than he should like them. She took this to mean that he basically liked 18, 19-year-old girls who were submissive and that he could dominate over. She didn't think it was necessarily that he wanted a sex slave. She thought it was just more that he wanted that power dynamic. So their relationship continued on for another year, and around this time Charlene found herself wanting to explore her sexuality more. Even though she was married to Gerald, she wanted to try being with women, and so she did it behind his back. She just started meeting up with these women and he had no idea, but one day Gerald came home from work very early and caught her in bed with another woman and he absolutely lost it. He beat both the women and then threw out the other woman onto the street with no clothes and then continued to beat Charlene at home. After this, Charlene stopped seeing other women behind his back. The couple carried on as normal, and shortly after this incident, Charlene found out that she was actually pregnant with Gerald Gallego's baby, and Gerald was actually fuming about this. He ordered her to abort the baby. He even tried denying that the baby was not his, but she had only been cheating with women. Anyway, he demanded that the baby should be aborted, and it was. But that same year, so if you remember, Gerald had a daughter in his first ever marriage when he was like 16 years old, and they named their daughter Krista. Now Krista was like 12 or 13 years old, and she was coming to visit her father Gerald for his birthday. So she came to stay over with her father for a while, and he proceeded to spend the whole trip sexually assaulting his own daughter. Something that he had done every chance that he got since she was like 6 years old. He didn't get to see her that often, but when he did, it was always a horrific time for her. So when Krista returned home, she actually told her mother about the abuse that she had endured at her father's house, and her mother was appalled. She was horrified to hear that her ex-husband had been doing this to their daughter, so they went to the police station and filed some charges against Krista's father, Gerald Gallego. But he wasn't going to know that had happened for a while, because it takes a little while for paperwork to get back to him, so he just continued living his life as normal. He didn't know that he was soon going to be a wanted man for incest. So he and Charlene finally got officially married in 1978, around the same time of the report. But anyway, as all of this wedding fun had been going on, charges had been filed against him, and then warrant was issued for his arrest, and I think somehow Gerald Gallego got to know of this. I don't know how he found out, but he did, and within a week of the wedding, Gerald had changed his name and somehow convinced his wife to uproot and move away with him. So Gerald Gallego was now Stephen Robert File, and he and Charlene moved to Sacramento to go and live near Charlene's father. They chose Sacramento because obviously Charlene's father is rich and he can just pay for them to live there and do anything they want, but also he could help them find jobs because he was quite a powerful man. And that's exactly what they needed. Charles found Gerald a job and Gerald took it. He was like a barman, but Gerald only had that job for 3 months before he was eventually fired. And after that he didn't even bother to find a new job because Charlene's father was rich, so he took full advantage of that. And that brings us back to the timeline. Now police are at Charlene Gallego's house learning what kind of people Charlene and Gerald are from Charlene's father Charles, and this is when they find out that Gerald Gallego is actually a horrible man. And this horrible man was last seen speeding away in a car with 2 people that are now missing. And it was just then, when the police were in this conversation with Charles at their home, that the police received a phone call. This phone call was from some other police officers back at the station who had just got reports that a body had just been found. So the police had just learned that Gerald Gallego was not a good person at all. He was actually a very horrible and merciless man with no heart, and police have also just received news that a body has been found, and this body was identified as that of 22-year-old Craig Miller. Craig was found laying face down in a field on the side of the road, in the middle of nowhere. He had multiple gunshot wounds to the head, he was fully clothed, but for some reason didn't have his shoes. So now this investigation took on a different turn because Mary Beth was still not found, and no one knows if she's still alive to be saved or dead. But police are still pretty set on Charlene and Gerald Gallego as their top suspects in this case, but they have no idea where they are. Officers were quickly able to get the address of Gerald Gallego's rental apartment, and so police went down there. They knocked on the door and no answer. No one was there, but they were able to look through the windows and on one of the shelves in Gerald Gallego home. They saw a bunch of guns and a bunch of bullets, but this doesn't necessarily make them murderers, but the gun did look very similar to the kind of gun that would have been used to kill Craig Miller. Gerald was known to own guns and operate them. He used them as his hobby. And I think that was actually why he was fired from his job as a bartender just 3 months of working. It was because there was one particular night where they were all getting really rowdy and having fun. Everyone was really drunk and it was like a party, and then all of a sudden Gerald Gallego pulls his gun from his pocket and just starts shooting bullets at the roof, like trying to get attention from more people, especially the ladies, because he was known to have charms on ladies a lot, but obviously it didn't work out the way that he wanted, and he was fired because this is completely inappropriate to be shooting off your gun in the bar that you work at. And when the police heard this story as to how Gerald Gallego got fired from his job, they wanted to go down to that bar and speak with the people there. And so they did. They went and spoke with his old boss, and his boss said the bullets are still stuck up in the roof over there, pointing to where he shot. So these police officers went up to the roof, dislodged the bullets and sent them to the lab for testing, and they were found to be the same bullets that killed Craig Miller. So now they were very sure that it had to be Charlene and Gerald Gallego that did something to Craig and Mary Beth, but they still couldn't see any connection between the two couples and they couldn't understand why this had happened. Charlene's blue car was found later that evening abandoned in a car park, and police still don't know where Charlene and Gerald are, so police quickly theorized that the couple got on a bus and they were probably headed across America right now. So police are feeling a little bit demotivated right now, because if this is true, if they've got on a bus and just headed across America, then it was going to be very difficult to find them. But in a very lucky turn of event, the next morning Charlene made contact with her father. She called him and said that she had run out of money and she really needed him to send $500 to her, and he did that without asking any questions because that's his daughter and he was willing to do everything for her, and he didn't even ask her whereabouts or anything. I think he definitely should have worked with police on this. But anyway, he just sent her the $500, and then a couple of days later, he got another call from Charlene saying that she'd run out of that $500 and she desperately needed another $500. She told her father that they were rarely far away. I don't know where they had traveled to, but it was pretty far away from Sacramento. And she wanted $500 to be able to get back home to Sacramento. And as Charles is on the phone talking to his daughter Charlene and he's listening to all this, and as much as he wants to help his daughter, he knows that he has to do the right thing. He knew that he could not keep protecting his daughter like this anymore, and so Charles called the FBI and told them that his daughter was asking for more money over the phone. So the police decided to work with Charles on this. They told him to send the money, but send it to a very particular place, because if they could do that, then police would be able to intercept. At that particular place, it was almost like they could lure Charlene and Gerald to a particular place to be able to catch them. So that's exactly what they did. Charles decided to send the money to a particular office that was kind of in the area where Charlene and Gerald said that they were. So then when Charlene and Gerald went to go and pick up that money, police could be there waiting for them, and this plan went perfectly. Of course, Charlene and Gerald turned up just when they were supposed to. And officers were able to arrest them, handcuff them and bring them back to Sacramento, and it was as the two of them were being transported back to Sacramento that the police received another phone call. And this was the phone call that they never wanted to get, but they kind of thought that it was coming. On Saturday, November 22, 1980, the worst-case scenario on the fate of Mary Beth Soares was realized. Just before 3 p.m., two young men target shooting in a field in Placer County discovered the badly decomposed body of a young woman lying in a shallow trench. She was wearing a purplish-blue silk evening gown that matched the description of the one the missing co-ed was wearing the night of the Sigma Phi Epsilon Founders Day dinner dance. The two young men, who lived in the area, immediately drove to the home of Placer County Sheriff and reported their grisly discovery. During an autopsy the following day, the victim was positively identified as Mary Elizabeth Soares by an expert in forensic dentistry after studying her dental charts. The autopsy further revealed that Mary Beth, whose hands were bound behind her back, had been shot 3 times in the head, just as her fiancé Craig Miller had been. The new charge of the murder of Mary Elizabeth Soares was added to the serious charges Gerald and Charlene Gallego already faced, and it was very unbelievable that a woman who is 8 months pregnant could be part of such horrible crimes. On January 17, 1981, Charlene, while in a prison ward, gave birth to a baby boy named Gerald Armand Gallego Jr. Custody of the child was given to Charlene's parents, and when the baby was taken away from her, in order to get out of prison and be with him, she struck a deal. It took a while, but eventually prosecutors arranged for her to plead guilty to the murders of Craig Miller and Mary Beth Soares. In exchange for her plea and her testimony against Gerald, she was given a sentence of 16 years and 8 months, which was the minimum time to which she could be sentenced in California for first-degree murder. She struck a similar deal with Nevada authorities, pleading guilty to the second-degree murder of Karen Twiggs and Stacy Redican and receiving the same sentence. Oregon prosecutors decided to let California and Nevada bear the expense of investigation and trial and declined to file charges. Authorities in California were not happy with the plea bargain and tried to have it withdrawn, but in late 1983, a Sacramento County Superior Court judge dropped the charges against Charlene in the Miller and Soares deaths. So she sat with her lawyers and told them everything right from the beginning. On September 11, 1978, Gerald was ready. He awoke Charlene, who was 2 months pregnant and suffering from morning sickness, and told her he had plans that she was to help him execute. They drove in their 1973 Dodge conversion van to Sacramento's Country Club Plaza shopping center, where Gerald gave Charlene her assignment. She was to locate 2 suitable sex slaves and lure them out to the parking lot and into the van. She was hesitant at first, afraid that she'd be unsuccessful, or worse, be caught. Gerald told her she was taking too long, and if she knew what was good for her, she'd do what he said. She redoubled her efforts, and before long had zeroed in on 2 prime candidates. Rhonda Scheffler, 17, and Kippy Vaught, 16, were out for an afternoon of shopping and whatever fun they could scare up when Charlene, who looked about their age, approached them asking if they'd like to smoke some pot. It sounded like just the adventure they were looking for. They followed her eagerly out to the parking lot, where she opened the van. Inside, Gerald waited with a .25 caliber pistol. The girls were surprised, afraid, and easily subdued. Gerald bound them with tape and told Charlene to watch them while he drove. They headed east on I-80 toward the Sierra Nevada mountains. At Baxter, California, they left the interstate and Gerald steered them further away from civilization and into the foothills. After finding a suitable spot, he left the van with the girls, the gun, and a sleeping bag, telling Charlene to wait. When he returned hours later, he told her to take the van into Sacramento and visit friends in order to establish an alibi. Then she was to drop off the van and return in their Oldsmobile. Charlene did as she was told, and when she returned to the woods outside Baxter, Gerald ordered the girls into the back seat of the Oldsmobile. He sat with them and directed Charlene, who drove until he said to stop. Along the way he talked as if he would presently release the captives, but when he finally ordered Charlene to pull over, he ordered the girls out, knocked them unconscious with a tire iron, and shot them. Gerald and Charlene, having married quickly in Reno, decided to leave California for a while until the heat from the murder investigation diminished. Rather than see their daughter and their good name disgraced by Gerald's apprehension, Charles and Mercedes Williams stepped in to assist. They instructed Charlene to steal her cousin's birth certificate. And with that, Gerald obtained a driver's license and other documentation in the name of Stephen Robert File. Then Charles Williams used his business pool to get Gerald a job driving a truck for a supermarket in Houston. The job, however, did not suit Gerald, and he and Charlene were in Reno by the following spring. For a while things were relatively normal. Gerald worked for a time as a driver for a meat distributor, while Charlene worked in the office of another distributor. But by June Gerald had again left his job, and in his restlessness, he had begun formulating a new plan. He wanted new sex slaves, and the best place to get them, he figured, was the Washoe County Fair. 14-year-old Brenda Judd and 13-year-old Sandra Colley were almost out of the fairgrounds and on their way home when Charlene stopped them. She needed help distributing advertising leaflets in the parking lot, she said, and would they be interested in earning a few extra dollars? When the girls agreed, Charlene said she needed to get more leaflets from her van and led the way through the lot. The 3 got into the van, and Gerald, who had been watching and following Charlene from a distance, arrived a moment later. Brandishing a gun, Gerald bound the girls and headed for I-80. On the way to the highway, he stopped at a hardware store, returning to the van with a hammer and a shovel. Gerald drove east on I-80 for a while, then headed into the hills toward Mustang. After a while he told Charlene to drive, while he got into the back of the van and assaulted the girls. He took his time, and Charlene kept driving further into the Nevada hills. Eventually telling Charlene she drove too fast, Gerald took the wheel again. When he stopped, he took the girls away from the van one at a time, using his new tools to kill and bury them. Charlene cleaned out the van when they returned to Reno the next morning, but Gerald decided to keep his hammer and shovel. Meanwhile, though Brenda and Sandra had been reported missing, there was some confusion regarding 2 other girls who had run away to join the carnival company that ran the midway rides for the fair. Even when that was cleared up, the investigation into their disappearance didn't get far. Feeling reasonably safe, Gerald and Charlene left Reno and returned to Sacramento within a couple of months. Things settled down. Gerald found new sexual intrigue with another woman, and Charlene was relieved that his demands on her and frustrations had lessened. But in time, the novelty of his new conquest wore off and Gerald was again seeking excitement. April 24, 1980, found Gerald and Charlene eyeing the crowds of teenagers in the parking lot of Tower Records in Sacramento. Seeing too many cops mixed in for their liking, they moved on to the Sunrise Mall in Citrus Heights, about 20 minutes outside Sacramento. They'd had good luck at a mall with their first victims, they reasoned, so why not try again? Stacy and Redican and Karen Twiggs, both 17, were worldly girls, but not wise enough to realize that the offer Charlene made to them of free drugs and a ride in a cool van would lead to their deaths. Even as Gerald pointed his .357 Magnum at them and ordered Charlene to drive, they seemed more inquisitive than frightened. As if they thought the situation was some sort of grown-up game they should play along with. Presently, though, reality sank in. This was no game. As Charlene headed east on I-80, Gerald crawled in the back of the van and raped them repeatedly. Every so often, he paused to shout some directions to Charlene, and after a while they ended up at Limerick Canyon near Lovelock. As he had done before, he walked the girls away from the van one at a time and dispatched them with a hammer. This time, though, Charlene wouldn't let him keep his weapon. She flung the hammer out the van window on the way back to Sacramento. Charlene, who had had an abortion the previous year, realized that she was once again pregnant. She steeled herself for Gerald's reaction, expecting the worst, and was shocked when he seemed rather pleased. The idea of creating life fed his enormous ego, and besides, domesticity provided an excellent cover for his true wickedness. He even went as far as marrying Charlene again, this time using his Stephen Robert File alias. Feeling that his new marriage helped to cement his new identity and further obscure his old one, Gerald breathed easy and he began to take risks. The Gallegos, now living as the Files, were on a small vacation in Oregon when they spied their next victim. It was June 7, 1980, and Linda Aguilar wasn't Gerald's type. She was 21, had dark hair and eyes, and was pregnant. But when he saw her walking beside the highway, he decided he had to have her. He slowed the van and asked Linda if she needed a ride. Linda, on her way home from a local store, accepted. Charlene knew the routine by now. Presently, Gerald ordered her to drive and began his sexual assault. In a while they stopped, and Charlene wandered about in the woods, killing time until Gerald was ready to go. When he found a spot he felt was suitably isolated, he took Linda away from the van, striking her with a rock, then strangling her. Authorities first believed Linda, who was known as something of a free spirit, had merely wandered off. But as the days passed, suspicion mounted, and when her body was found later that month, police suspected her boyfriend of the killing. Even though one witness reported seeing a pregnant woman getting into a van the day of Linda's disappearance, the circumstantial evidence against the boyfriend weighed more heavily in the minds of the police. He had beaten Linda before, and it seemed he would be charged with her murder soon. Gerald was getting bolder and more impatient. It was only a month and a half before he was ready to strike again. He and Charlene spent the day of July 16, 1980 drinking themselves silly, then spent the evening doing even more drinking at the Sail Inn, a bar in West Sacramento. Gerald was belligerent and boastful that night, and seemed to pay no special attention to Virginia Mochel, the bartender. When closing time came, though, he told Charlene he wasn't ready to leave. They waited in the parking lot, and when Virginia came out after locking up the bar, Gerald forced her into the van with his gun. But this time, instead of heading out into the countryside, he drove the van home. Charlene waited inside watching television, and when he finished raping Virginia, Gerald told Charlene to get in the van. He made her drive, and while she did, he strangled Virginia. They dumped the body outside Clarksburg. The next day, Gerald celebrated his 34th birthday with unseemly glee. Virginia Mochel had 2 small children and was not the unsettled sort of person, so police took her disappearance seriously. Patrons of the Sail Inn reported that 2 strangers, a man named Stephen and his girlfriend Charlene, had come into the bar that night. Police tracked Gerald down at his new bartending job, and he admitted he'd been at the Sail Inn that night. He knew nothing of what had become of Virginia Mochel. However, Charlene gave similar answers and told police offhandedly that she and her boyfriend had been fishing that day. When Virginia's body was found, her hands were bound with fishing line, which raised detective suspicions, but didn't offer anything concrete against the couple. But they decided to keep their eye on him for a little while. I mean, they couldn't do anything because he wasn't officially a suspect, but they kept their eye on him. And that was when they found out that Gerald was actually selling his van. The van that he drove on the night that Virginia went missing, and it's quite coincidental because a woman goes missing and he suddenly wants to get rid of the car that he was driving at the time. Police just thought it was a bit suspicious, and so they let him sell it, and then they got in touch with the buyer and went to search the van that was around the buyer's house. So, police opened the back doors of this van and the first thing they see is a massive blood-soaked mattress. This mattress was sent off to the lab for testing, but it was found that the blood actually wasn't Virginia's and they didn't have a match. They didn't know whose blood this was, and for some reason detectives on that case decided to just drop it. I actually don't know why. Just because it's not Virginia's blood doesn't mean you haven't just found a blood-soaked mattress. Maybe they should have looked into that because it's someone's blood, and had they kept going and figured out whose blood that was, maybe this would have led to an arrest. They might have been able to catch Charlene and Gerald before they would go on to murder their 9th and 10th victims. Craig Miller and Mary Beth Soers. On the night of that frat party that Mary Beth and Craig disappeared from, Charlene and Gerald were just out in their car, once again, looking for another victim. And that was when they spotted Mary Beth walking with her boyfriend. And now, as all his plans have become successful, he doesn't have the patience to wait for Charlene to bring the victims to him, so he approached them in the middle of a parking lot and pulled a gun in their face and shouted, "Let go." And of course Mary Beth and Craig were terrified and they just did it. He ordered them to go and sit in the back of this blue car, and they did, and I think it was at this point that Gerald and Charlene actually got out of the car and went and spoke with each other a few feet away. And it was at this point Craig's friend Andy comes and runs over to the car and jumps in the driver's seat laughing and joking. Charlene sees this, runs over to the car and pulls Andy out. She slapped him. She jumped in the car. Gerald sees what happened and he's panicked as well, so he runs in, jumps in the passenger side, and they speed off in this car with their 2 new hostages, Mary Beth Soers and Craig Miller. Charlene drove as Gerald turned around and started speaking with Mary Beth. He was asking them their names, and of course they told him. Gerald turned to Craig and asked him if he had any money. Craig said he probably had about $10 on him, and so Gerald turned to Mary Beth and said, "What are you doing with a bomb like this?" And that was the end of the conversation. Eventually Gerald instructed Charlene to get him off the highway and get to somewhere private. She drove them out onto this gravel road in the middle of nowhere and stopped the car. And that was when Gerald ordered Craig Miller to get out of the car. Once the 2 men were outside, Craig started pleading with him to just let Mary Beth live, just to make sure that she was okay and safe, and Gerald just looked at Craig and laughed and said there's no chance of that happening. Gerald then pointed in a direction and told Craig to walk. He barely let him take 2 steps before he raised the gun and shot him in the back of the head. Gerald then went and jumped back in the car and left Craig Miller's body laying on the ground and told Charlene to drive them back to their apartment, and she did. As soon as they got there, Gerald dragged Mary Beth to the bathroom and he proceeded to rape her multiple times over and over again. And as this was happening, Charlene goes and lays on the couch and just had a nap. She could hear the whole thing. I mean everything that was happening in the bathroom, but she couldn't do anything about it. So after a few hours, Gerald then dragged Mary Beth out of the bathroom to the living room and told both women that they were getting back in the car. So they all got in the van and he started driving. They drove out into the middle of nowhere in Nevada, and Gerald stopped the van, went and grabbed Mary Beth and dragged her out into this field. Once they were there, he ordered her to lay face down on the ground and he proceeded to shoot her multiple times at the back of her head. Charlene said she remembered Gerald returning to the van smiling. He then jumped in and drove them back to their apartment where he cleaned up the crime scene. So now Charlene Gallego has told the police everything about every single murder that she has been a part of, and now it's time for Charlene and Gerald to go to trial. Charlene Gallego pled guilty to the following charges: 2 counts of first-degree murder for Craig Miller and Mary Beth Soers, and 2 counts of second-degree murder for Stacy and Redican and Karen Twiggs. She was found guilty of all of the above, and she was sentenced to 16 years and 8 months in prison without the possibility of parole. She was very cooperative with police officers throughout the whole investigation, throughout the whole trial process as well, and she even led police out to the burial sites of most of these girls. Without Charlene, they wouldn't have had any of the girls' bodies, and that is why her sentence was so low at 16 years, even though she played a part in these murders, but she also helped find a lot of evidence to the case. Before Gerald's trial will begin, he decided to fire his entire legal team and represent himself to be his own lawyer. So the trial began, and of course, most of the trial centered around Charlene Gallego. She was going to be in the stand and give a testimony about the kind of man her husband was. She was going to tell all the different stories about how he'd killed and lured in different girls. She told the court that her husband was mentally and physically abusive and the reason why he had got her to help him with these kidnappings, rapes and murders was to satisfy some kind of twisted sexual fantasy that he had about wanting to own a sex slave. She told the court that she was very afraid of her husband. He was a very violent man and that he would beat her often, and she felt that if she didn't join in and do what he asked, then she would be beaten. But she said that, ultimately, the reason why she did everything that she did throughout this case and murders was because she loved him, and she continued to say that she would do anything for him. So Charlene sat and said all of this in court, and then the next day Gerald gets up because, of course, remember, he is his own lawyer and he has to cross-examine his own wife, and his tactic was to undermine her credibility, make her look like an idiot. He wanted to get up there and make her look like some sort of unstable drug addict so that the courts wouldn't trust her account. He was trying and trying and trying, but it was kind of hard to discredit her because her stories seemed so real, obviously, because they were. But he was desperately trying to pull out all her dirty laundry, saying that she takes these drugs all the time and she's always in that club doing these drugs with different people. He was really humiliating this woman in front of the court. He was getting very childish and very desperate, and even brought up her marital affair, that she slept with women, and he even brought up the fact that she'd been having a relationship with a woman in prison, and at this point the judge has had enough. It was not a professional cross-examination by any means, it was actually just laughable, and in his closing statement he said, "I'm not bragging, but if I've had problems with girls, it's not because I haven't had enough, it's because I've had too many." After just 2 hours of deliberation, the jury came back and found Gerald Gallego guilty of all charges, and the judge sentenced him to death. In fact, Gerald Gallego is one of very few prisoners in America to actually be sentenced to death twice. Gerald was on death row for over 20 years and he never made it to his execution day. He died of rectal cancer at the age of 56 on July 18, 2002. Charlene Gallego was released from prison in 1997 at the age of 40, and she has completely changed her name. She's remarried and moved on with her life, and she's living a very normal life now. And Charlene actually refers to herself as a victim of Gerald Gallego. She said there were victims who died and there were victims who lived. It's taken me a hell of a long time to realize I am one of the ones who lived. And this is all I have for this case. Thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed, please subscribe, comment and leave a thumbs up down below, and thanks for watching once again.